One of the earliest recollections that I have as a small boy is on a summer's evening, you know, the many chimney stacks that stood up round Burnden Park and the smoke drifting out the tops of them. To me, it was quite romantic, you know, a bit unhealthy, but quite romantic. And then on a winter's night, where they had a night shift on in a big mill, when you went and looked through the windows, the hundreds of yards of line shafting all howling round, all like chromium plates.
Fred Dibnah will always be remembered for his passions for steeplejacking and steam, and for his love for the industrial landscape that surrounded him when he was growing up in Bolton in the 1940s.
It appealed to him a great deal, the Bolton of the 1930s and 40s and 50s, really because it was his own territory, it was something that he was familiar with.
See the boilers?
Perhaps if he could have turned back the clock, he would have lived in those times, maybe in the 30s or 40s, and been something like an engine driver in a weaving mill, spinning mill, something like that. But it was at the very root of Fred that was ingrained into him and part of his psyche and who he felt he was.
As Fred was growing up, Britain was still the most urbanised and industrialised nation in the world, accounting for a quarter of world trade in manufacturing. It's an era that is almost forgotten, but Fred reminded us of it.
As a small boy, I was always over-inquisitive, you know, like climbing over fences and getting in places where you shouldn't really be. And I used to discover all sorts of things, you know, quite close by to where I lived, a beautiful water wheel with a tree growing through it, but they still had a steam engine, you know, so like the steam engines and the water wheels for a brief period worked side by side, you know.
Fred had wandered around the streets, I'm sure, and wandered into boiler houses and engine houses. And he'd talk for hours and listen, particularly. He had a gift of listening as well as talking, and gaining friendships and acquaintanceships, particularly with old men, old knowledgeable men.
With his younger brother Graham, he'd go to play down by the old mill lodges.
We used to go fishing, and our kid and his mate, they were forever making rafts. And you know, sailing on these rafts like and on lodges, and we had really good times. And he used to make, in the old factory at bottom, he used to make a lot of like dens, and well, we used to go and sit in like and have a quick cig and whatever. But when it come time for demolishing the chimneys, he sat there on the bank of these lodges all day, from getting up at morning till they finished at 5 o'clock. And he used to watch them all the time, knocking them down these chimneys. And he used to come home and said to me, Mother, like, I won't be a steeplejack, I won't be a steeple. My mother said, you're joking. She says, you must be mad. Anyway, all the worst to us, that's what he was doing.
In the 60 years since then, our urban and industrial landscape has changed dramatically, as whole industries have disappeared. But Fred's memory stayed with him and became the biggest influence on his life and work.
I remember as a lad of about 16 or 17, rather full of fear, climbing up the engine house steps and looking at the thing going round through the window and seeing the engine minder in an easy chair snoozing, you know, but he wouldn't really be asleep. He'd be listening for any strange change in the pattern of noise that were coming from the thing, which of course denoted something was going wrong if a different noise started appearing. Steam comes through this big red pipe into the high pressure cylinder. Well, when it's been dealt with in there, it goes through another pipe underneath the bottom of the engine and back into the low pressure cylinder. Well, when it's been finished with in there, it goes into the condenser where it's turned back into water again. Now this is the piston rod that pushes the crosshead, that's this bit that we can hardly keep up with, that works the connecting rod that turns round the big end, which this is the big end. A lot bigger than the big end in your motor car.
Oh, he grew up with fantastic machinery that he could look at, and he could also see all the mills, all the mill chimneys. It must have been, for him, it must have been absolutely fantastic to have been growing up with the industry that was here. We had engineering works and we had all the cotton mills.
Yeah, well, it's quite dangerous, really.
It is, yeah.
You get trapped in between.
Yeah, you're piecing up like...
Yeah.
We piece his ends up like this.
Yeah. And you've got to be somewhat of an expert nut tire as well.
Oh,
yeah. Do they often break? Like,
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
If it's spinning bad, they're breaking down all the time.
Ah, yeah.
And that's what you've got to do.
Yeah.
On here with piecework,
Yeah.
you've got to keep them going.
Yeah, yeah.
And we used to get his wage in one wage packet. And then we used to share it on a Thursday.
Yeah, yeah. What, with all the ones who cleaned all the, between all the spinners?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What they call piecers.
Yeah.
They were like
little pieces.
That's right. They were like apprentices, if you will.
Yeah.
But when it's coming out, it's spinning.
Yeah.
It's putting twisting.
Yeah.
It's coming off
Yeah.
this top.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you'll see it, the whole lot will stop.
Yeah.
Now, we go that way.
Yeah.
And then
Winding on top
that's
of
right.
it,
Yeah. Oh, they're brilliant.
Very clever, eh? Yeah, they didn't know what they were doing then, did they, when they did this? They used to say, didn't they, in the olden days, England's bread hangs on Lancashire's thread.
Yeah.
And they spun it up before breakfast to do all of England. The rest of the day were for the Empire.
Fred's passion for the history of the places he showed us on the television actually really raised public interest and made people want to go and visit. There's so much of our industrial history around us, and it's part of what makes us what we are, and what made Britain what it is today. That is something we should be interested in, and Fred had a talent for making that really interesting for people.
This is Burnley and this is Queen Street Mill. They were very famous for weaving, and this is a great weaving shed. And if you really want to get the feel of what it's like in a steam-driven weaving shed, this, without a doubt, is the place to come.
It was all hustle and bustle. All cotton mills were going, engineering works, gas works. Very busy. You know, you went out work in the morning, got to a bus stop and two buses would go past, full. You had no chance of getting on them. Of course, there weren't as many cars about then. A time when you could knock on any door and get a job, and they'd say, "Can you start now?"
In the morning, going to work in the morning at 50s, I started at 53. And everybody had clogs on, and clump on bus at 6 o'clock in the morning, 5:45, catch 6 o'clock bus from Wigan. Walking down Scoldbrew, you must have woke everybody up, 50, 60 men all walking down with clogs on. You girls go to work same in mills, you know, because they started at 6. It was like middle of the day, especially up Market Square where all buses were. There were hundreds of people knocking about. Not like now, you go now at 6 o'clock in the morning, there's nobody there. They're all still in bed.
There's a super tale that comes to my mind that one day I was mending a chimney and the engineer at the mill, this particular engine were in a weaving shed similar to this. And you've heard how these gears roar and all that. Well, if you can imagine, they've repaired the engine and it's the middle of the night and they set the engine on just to see if everything works all right. And all of a sudden, all the operatives appeared, or most of them who hadn't got an alarm clock. Their lives were totally ruled by the noise of the gearing and the engine. You know, when the engine started, they thought it was 7 o'clock. And in actual fact, it was 3 o'clock in the bloody morning, you know. They all appeared ready for work at 3 o'clock in the morning. In an electrically driven weaving shed, you know, there's only the electric motors and the looms making the racket. Here, we've already got tons of racket just from the bevel gears from the main shaft driven by the steam engine, driving all these line shaftings and all the clack of the belts, you know. Should imagine being like 14 years old and arriving here on Monday morning at 7:30 and being frightened to bloody death with it all. I mean, it's unbelievably violent. And of course, there's only 2 looms actually working at this moment in time. When all these machines were running, the decimals must have been unbelievable. God knows, you know, no wonder they were all deaf.
To the general public, unless you've been in a mill, you wouldn't really know what was going on, and I think he brought that out, and he brought out the hard work that a lot of these guys and a lot of the ladies had to do.
I don't really think I would ever like to have worked in one of these places, you know. Having actually experienced the noise and of it all, I'm really more interested in the mechanics of it all, you know, the engines and the boilers that made it all go.
I suppose the biggest influence on Fred must have been growing up surrounded by the Industrial Revolution and its products. I mean, there he was as a craftsman with his day job as a steeplejack, and he therefore went into lots of places, saw lots of things when they were just sort of over the top and starting their decline. So, and probably when they were at their most unfashionable, the bad old days, and when it was all going to be swept away and we were all going to be living as a life like in an American film. And Fred, I think, was somebody who could see that that world that he was in and those people he was rubbing up against had extraordinary stories to tell. And I think that really has been a very big influence upon him.
Hiya, Brian.
Hello, Fred, you all right?
Stalking up.
Yes.
Yeah, keep that big wheel going round upstairs.
Yes, that's true.
When I were a kid, there were bloody hundreds of these, weren't there? There were 3 down every street, and now there's hardly any left. It's still nice to see one that actually works, you know, like there's not so many left that work, is there?
No.
You know? Yeah, what a lot of people don't realise, do they, is the fact that these things used to blow up with unbelievable regularity at the turn of the century, you know, until they started with boiler inspecting and all of that.
I wouldn't have bothered them, would they? With
No. Well, they did. A lot of them were so tight, weren't they, the mill owners? They didn't like parting with inspection fees and all of that. You need some more steam.
Well, yes, I think
you had to put some coal on.
Well, there you go, that shovel for you, look.
You'll have to excuse me if I miss the fire engine. You don't want to come off the shovel.
I think I'll leave you to it, Fred, and I'll go on for my tea now.
Fred's a very passionate man. Anybody that knows him is overtaken by his enthusiasm. He's not an easy bloke to disagree with, and you just naturally get carried along with his enthusiasm for the subject, for the machines, and you want to see what it is that excites him so much.
That were exciting, weren't it? When I was repairing the chimney on foundries, you know, I always used to stop work and go and watch this performance of dropping the bottom out of the blast furnace. You know, it was always very exciting to me.
Fred was a great enthusiast, and we always enjoyed his visits here because he was so knowledgeable about the great age of industry that we tried to interpret at Ironbridge. And he also lived through a large part of a century when we started off by trying to knock down the Victorian monuments, and he was part of that, knocking down the great chimneys of the mills, and then began to value it. And of course he was very much involved with the loving restoration of the steam machinery, bringing it alive for a wide public. And I think he did have that capacity to get to a lot of people and bring the subject alive for them.
Ironbridge Gorge in Shropshire is probably the most important industrial heritage site in Britain. It's regarded as the place where the Industrial Revolution started.
This is the world's first cast iron bridge. Iron was so important round here that this place was regarded as the beginning or the cradle of the Industrial Revolution. It wasn't just bridges they made here, you know, they made here in this valley, they made the first wheels, cast iron wheels, the first cast iron plate rails, cooking pots, and even the first locomotive were made here. As you can see, there's one or two blowholes in the castings, you know, they weren't too particular. But really on the whole, you know, the whole thing is beautifully done, all held together with dovetails and cotters and iron wedges. Very few nuts and bolts, you know. It's suffered a bit here and there. There's the odd bracing piece that's fractured, and there's been various attempts to rectify it with iron rods and what have you. But the only way I think they could have cast these is actually on the floor of the foundry and directly tap the furnace into the mould. Perhaps that accounts for all the slag and the rough stuff, you know, which normally they would scrape off the top of the molten metal.
Apparently down at these museums on the Severn and that, they reckon the doors are full up. People can't wait to get in these industrial museums. I'm sure it's because of Fred's made them think and realise that there's a beauty in all this ugliness, if you like. But it wasn't ugly, it's ugly to some people, not to Fred and not to me. It's beautiful.
This thing here, made out of a conglomeration of railway lines and bits and pieces, is the furnace, where they actually got the iron hot ready to put either through the rollers or underneath the hammer. And it's a magical setup really, because the heat that got the iron red hot, the waste heat that went up the flue to the boiler, which that boiler is called a Rastrick boiler, and it actually worked off the waste heat from the furnaces. And what I remember all this lot going in Bolton where I live, and believe me, it was quite an exciting vision watching how it all went. First of all, when the signal were given, the guy crashed these big tongs into the fire, grabbed hold of a 200 weight of red hot iron, come out. He got to race off with sparks coming off his clogs this way. Bang! And then the guy waiting here with these tongs, he got hold of the end of it and smashed it into the rollers. And then it went through, and a man on the other side did exactly the same, and it come back this way. As the tail end of the iron came out of here, the guy collared it with these things and slammed it back into the next opening.
He actually knew our ironworks when it was a functioning ironworks in Bolton, and he used to tell us stories about how things actually went on at the ironworks, which some were very surprising, like the fact that there were broken down armchairs quite near the furnaces where people would go and relax.
This lot here is actually the rolling mill that used to be in Bolton, where I come from, and I well remember seeing the thing work as a reasonably young man, and it was quite fantastic. You know, they had easy chairs, and there'd be about 6 of them sat in the easy chairs, and 6 of them shoving the iron into the rollers. And when they'd done so many passes and they were like exhausted, the 6 sat down and jump up and take over, and the other 6 would flop into the easy chairs. Some of them went straight to the pub across the road. Then there's other things about this machine that we've not really dwelled on. In that great iron cage at the end, there's a coupling that's quite a rocky fit on the shafts. And if you put a piece in that weren't hot enough, it busted the coupling instead of the engine or the roll frames. And of course, soon as it went bang, there was a hell of a crack when it broke. Everybody immediately walked off towards the sink, washed their hands and went home, because they knew there'd be no more rolling that day.
this enthusiasm for industrial history really took off after the Second World War, and by the 1980s it had become very much an accepted part of our heritage. But people like Fred have been very important in changing public perceptions and getting a new consensus that the great machine shops, the factories, the commercial buildings of the Victorian age are a very important part of our heritage and should be conserved. And he was a good spokesman for that, I think.
Richard Garrett and Sons of Leiston here in Suffolk were one of the pioneers in heavy engineering. And here in the Long Shop Museum is a grand collection of the products that they made in the actual building that they were made in. This place is rather wonderful and unique because Richard Garrett manufactured portable engines in here, and the boilers came in at one end and the big bits coming from the sides, and the small bits were made upstairs and lowered down. And of course when the boiler came in at one end and all the bits kept going on, it slowly but surely progressed along and went out the other end as a finished product ready for a coat of paint. That was a long time before Henry Ford were about.
I think Fred's passion was his greatest strength, and it came over in everything he did when he came here, when he went to other attractions, and that brought people into it. They wanted to learn more about it, because if somebody's that enthusiastic, it just spins off onto everybody else. It also increased our awareness and got us visitors. I'm forever getting people contacting me or speaking to me in general and saying, "Oh, saw you on the TV last night with Fred." And that helps us and raises the profile. It's great.
Yeah. And what were them for?
Anchor attachments on ships such as the Titanic.
Yeah. This is the Black Country Living Museum, where you can actually see craftsmen doing things what they did when this was one of the centres of industry in England.
Today we've got an awful lot of museums around, and it is sometimes difficult to get people who've worked in the industries that they portrayed to come back again. And I think Fred did quite a lot in raising the sort of image of the worker and their place, and making it okay for people to go back and to look on their past as being important.
How would they go on with the one as big as the Titanic chain, anchor chains?
Well, on that you'd have a chain maker, chainsmith, 4 to 5 men working hammers, up to 2-man hammers.
And of course that's really important for museums as well, that we need to get people who've been involved interested in what they've done and realise that it's of great value in heritage and historic terms.
Ladies used to do it, didn't they, a bit?
Oh, in this area by the 1920s, there was something like just over 6,000 people in the area making chains, and a third of those being women.
The Black Country Living Museum, we think, has a particular role to play in the history of the Black Country and therefore the cradle of the Industrial Revolution. But telling that story is hugely difficult. It's so complex. There are so many things involved, from steam to canals to buildings. And Fred helped us no end in his own way in putting it over. And through his enthusiasm, almost convinced us we were doing the right thing. And I'm sure he did that with lots of other people, that he would, if somebody was a volunteer restoring a steam engine or anything else, he could make you feel you're the most important person in the world for doing it. And we owe him a lot.
So you don't fancy for a living then, Fred?
I'll never get paid.
Well, you was paid by the weight.
Oh, well, there'd be no chance. I'd be a poor man at the end of the day. We just do a few improvements on it. Wait a minute. There's a big hole in it. Another link for the chain for the Titanic. No wonder it sunk.
Fred made industrial history fun, but in the process we got a lot of information from him.
Up until the 1850s, they only had really cast iron, you know, and they really needed something a bit tougher. And along came Henry Bessemer in 1855, and he invented this thing, like a giant egg cup. And basically, what it does is, the molten cast iron is poured into the top of it, and then wind pressure at 25 pounds per square inch is blasted through the molten cast iron, which takes all the impurities out of it. And when they run it off from here into ingots, it can be put underneath the steam hammer and forged into big blocks that can be put through rolling mills and made into things like railway lines and wheels for railway wagons. This is Callum Island Museum here in Sheffield, which Sheffield, as everybody knows, is a world-famous city for steel making, still is, you know. I think I'll go in and have a look round. Like Sheffield's always been associated with quality steel products, you know, especially like this here, Sheffield plate. And of course tools, you know, they made all the best cutting tools in the world, you know, sort of the tools for lathe turning, for surgeons for sawing your legs off and things like that. And really, unless you've tried buying a pair of Taiwanese scissors and comparing them with a pair of scissors made in Sheffield, you don't know you've lived, believe me. I've got a pair of scissors made in Sheffield that I left on top of a wall for 2 years once. And when I finally found them again, they were rusted solid, put a bit of oil on, and they still cut to this day better than the bloody Taiwanese ones do.
The feeling that we should be guilty of our past, our industrial might, our empire, I think is beginning to fade. I know it was politically incorrect for many years, but I feel certainly for people like Fred Dibnah's portrayal of our industrial strength, the characters, the people and the social history behind it, which for good or bad made us the country we are. I think that was a very important contribution. It's no longer, I don't think, something we should be guilty of. You know, we would recognise the weaknesses and strengths of the past, but we don't need necessarily to be ashamed of them. Therefore, the subject need no longer be a taboo one.
Right. Getting nearer.
Fred, of course, he had a great saying, and he says, everything I like in life is either heavy, dirty or dangerous, you know. And that weighed Fred up to a T, really. And I don't know where, I think he thought I were all three.
They're going back to the steam engines of, you know, my sort of childhood. You know, you meet people at steam rallies who, oh, this is a great big engine and this is that. And, you know, they could have only seen some of the engines that were in, you know, in industrial places. Like the one in Sheffield is a magical piece of tattle.
I'm really looking forward to this. This has got to be the biggest winding engine left in the world. And it was made about 1905 and it kept on running till 1970s. And I'm now going to do a demonstration of how fast that you can put it in reverse from full speed forward into going backwards. Here we go. Like that. I did.